Hello, my name is LoG and welcome to Quickies number 11, where I show you something that I think is cool in 5 minutes or less. Today we're going to talk about the importance of having alternate fingerings for licks that you're already playing. We're going to talk about 3 reasons why this is important. So let's get started with C# minor pentatonic, something really simple. I'm going to do descending groups of 4, sounds like this. Really simple phrase that most of you are probably already playing. Instead of playing it like that, which of course there's nothing wrong with that, I'm going to play it like this. Now of course, the fingering, of course the left hand fingering is different, the right hand picking configuration is different, but the main thing I want to focus on here is where I am playing this lick, where I end up, where I start, and the kind of general shapes that I am playing. You'll notice the original one I was staying right here the whole time, so maybe if I were to end the lick, maybe I would do something like this. Which is cool, perfectly fine, but because of the configuration of this new fingering, which again, instead of starting on pinky pointer finger, I'm starting on my pointer finger and then continuing like that, maybe licks like this might happen. Which is very different. Notice I have that kind of constantly descending motion horizontally, like I'm moving this way as opposed to moving this way, the original way I was playing it. And because of that, it's giving me different ideas, different shapes that I can use in a different way, but the core lick is exactly the same. That altered fingering is giving me those different options. Another one, or another reason why I really like doing this, and it's very simple, it kind of happens by itself, is changing the shape to get a different kind of rhythmic phrase, different accent pattern. So this one's going to be verbatim the same lick both times, just with different fingering. So this one will be a similar thing. How about descending groups of 6 instead of 4? Same shape, so it looks like this. Something like that, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Like that, pretty simple. So if you were to play that, most of the time you can alternate pick that whole thing, or you can, pull off something like that. Most of the time when you play it like that, what you're going to hear is this accent pattern, kind of a ba 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 ba, that sort of thing, because of how the notes are organized. But what happens if I did this? Instead of playing this note right there like I usually would, I'm going to play it here. So now the lick is this, instead of this. Notice immediately, you can hear that accent is different when I play that different fingering. Instead of daka, 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 it's now ba 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 da dum, ba da 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 dum, ba ba da da dum, as opposed to ba 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 ba. Very different feel when you, especially when you string them together. So instead of doing this, something like that, it now becomes this. Right? Very different phrase, mostly because of how I'm changing the fingering. That accent pattern, the rhythmic phrase, the flow of it is different because I'm just literally choosing to play one note in a different spot, opens up a new position for me to play it in, different sounds, etc. And then the last reason, that's kind of the most obvious reason, is to take a phrase that maybe is uncomfortable for you to play and altering it so that it fits more with your comfort zone or your technique. So let's say I'm playing that descending groups of 6, just like I did, doing something like that. Now that kind of picking configuration for me is honestly not that easy to play, that kind of fast alternate picking through a pentatonic scale. Kind of always not been great at it. But what can I do? Alter it slightly so that it fits more with my technique. My technique is kind of this, using more, hammer-ons pull-offs, maybe some economy picking, using my fingers if available. And so instead of playing the lick like I just did, I'm going to change one note. Watch this note. Instead of doing this, watch this note. Instead of playing that note right there, I'm going to play it here. Same note, right? Just different string. And look at what that allows my right hand to do. Instead of this, I can now do this. Right? So I'm taking a lick that was 2 notes, 2 notes, 2 notes, to 2 notes, 1 note, 3 notes, which allows me to use a little bit of that economy picking. So instead of doing this, I can now do something like this. Right? Which is much more comfortable to play, for me at least, and of course it will yield different ideas if you want it to, like I could do something along along those lines. And why is all that stuff coming out naturally? Because I'm using a technique that flows very comfortably into those ideas. So yeah, really simple concept. I mean, we're not really like drastically changing much. The licks are pretty much the same. We're just changing maybe where we're starting the lick, what finger we're using to start the lick on, maybe changing one little note of the passage, putting it on a different string, using a different finger to play that note, and it will give us a bunch of different ideas. It can make it technically easier to play. It will yield different ideas because we're moving to different locations or using different fingers, and it will naturally, most of the time at least, change the accent pattern of the run, especially if it's like a pattern like this. Super valuable stuff. You know, oftentimes if I'm playing, I'll play something and notice like, oh, that's a lick I've played for 6 months. Let's do something a little bit more interesting. So instead of just trashing the lick and trying to come up with something else, I'll just modify it, maybe change the fingering a little bit so that it turns into something new. Maybe I'll start the lick differently, or I'll end the lick differently, or the phrase is different. Whatever it is, you can add a lot of new life to these ideas. And the main thing in regards to finding fingerings for different licks or different ideas that you have, the number one thing you have to have is knowledge of the fretboard. You need to know, if I want to take this note, I can play this note here, or I can play it here, I can play it there, whatever it is. So if that's something that you're interested, it's honestly, shameless plug by the way, it's honestly the main whole kind of point of all the instructional material on my Patreon. That's the main thing we talk about, is knowing where you are on the fretboard, knowing what scale degree you're playing, what note you're playing, all the different variations of ways to play that same note or the same phrase, because once you have that, you can really adapt. You know, you won't be locked into one position, or, you know, start the lick with the same finger every time. Like if you want to play a lick starting with your pointer finger, great, but you can also play it starting with your middle, ring, or pinky, and that will yield different positions, different fingerings, different strings, which is super valuable, and that's kind of how you build that comfort with the fretboard. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below, as I usually say, and I'll see you guys in the next one.